So in this video, I want to talk about the work itself, like what it's like to actually talk to inmates one-on-one and sort of how I've approached that and some of the things I've seen. And probably in a separate video, I'll talk more about how I've changed or how it's affected me. But I want to focus more on the experience itself and maybe set aside a separate video to talk more about its impact on me personally and spiritually, emotionally, that kind of thing. In the last video, we talked about the actual layout of the jail itself, the physical building, and some of the other things about it as an institution. And now I want to talk more about the conversations that I've had there. And as I said in my earlier video, I am certainly not going to talk about any specific conversation with any specific inmate, but instead what I'll do is I'll speak in general terms, and maybe for simplicity what I'll do is I might provide some sort of composite anecdotes about some of my experiences. So not about one particular inmate, but certain patterns that I've seen in talking to a number of them over the last a few months or however long it's been. So to give you a little bit of an idea of the way I've approached my work, just given this work placement itself. So I'm under the supervision of a full-time chaplain who's employed at the jail. And basically what I've been doing primarily is meeting one-on-one with inmates who are in what we call the segregation unit. I think there's a more official name for it, but in terms of the colloquial term, they call it the seg unit, which is for segregation. And what that means practically is that each of the inmates I'm meeting with, they're in their own cell, so they're segregated from other inmates. So I don't know that I was kind of, and I don't mean this at all disparagingly, but I was sort of thrown into this. I think I saw my supervisor at the jail. I think he met with one inmate, and I was there to sort of get a sense for how he approaches it. He certainly gave me lots of ideas. I've been reading a lot about it and different sort of approaches one can take. But in my own experience, like nothing can really substitute for actually interacting with an inmate one-on-one. So I wasn't sure what to expect. I mean, some of the things I had in mind is I sort of assumed that most inmates would not be interested in talking to a chaplain. I mean, I'm not officially a chaplain, but for the keeping things simple, they see me as a chaplain, and that's sort of the role I'm filling as a student chaplain. So I sort of assumed that most people would tell me to buzz off and wouldn't be interested in talking to me. And there are some people that that do have that approach, although sort of to my surprise, like with a few exceptions, like even the people that don't want to talk to me are fairly polite about it. And to my surprise, more people than I expected actually want to talk. Now, there's all kinds of reasons for that. One thing you learn being on the inside of an institution is, how do I put it? There's lots of manipulation and deceit and, how do I put this? False selves that one might present. So not everything is what it appears to be, and I recognize that. And there's some people who perhaps they see some sort of advantage to being perceived as religious inside a jail. So I don't suppose that everyone who talks to me necessarily has a sincere faith or is even looking for a sincere faith. But I do think that many of the men that I do talk to are indeed sincere. It's hard to know, and what I've decided on that is, I mean, I want to be shrewd. No one wants to be manipulated or taken advantage of. But, you know, at the end of the day, I'm more inclined to sort of give people the benefit of the doubt. And frankly, how do I put this? I don't want to say I don't care. That's not quite right. But, you know, I'm going to do my best to interact with an inmate and provide some kind of care as best I know how, irrespective of whether I think they're being sincere or not. So that's sort of been my approach. So sort of to my surprise, more people wanted to talk than I expected. There's a lot going on, or there was for me, because you have to kind of, you know, listen carefully to what the inmate's saying. That's a big part of it, I'm finding, is and this is a concept that I've read about, this theology of presence, that there's something somewhat curative from a spiritual point of view, just being present and attentive with someone in the same space in the same time. And coming off COVID, this really struck me, that it's sort of unusual to interact with strangers that close. The physicality of it's interesting too, because in segregation, the inmate is in their own cell. They're behind a glass door or a metal door with, large glass windows. There's a hatch too, and occasionally I might interact with an inmate with the hatch open, although that's generally I don't. So you have to sort of speak through the crack of the door, and it can be hard to hear, as I think I mentioned. But what's interesting is it means that one tends to get pretty close to the person one's speaking to. So he's behind the glass, so he's cut off and separate from me, yet, I don't know, in some cases, like our eyeballs might be, no more than 18 inches apart or so, which is a fairly intimate way to be in the same space as someone else. So it's sort of strange. On the one hand, very much cut off and separate, yet also there's sort of an intensity of, being that close to another human being, especially in a situation that sort of by its nature is, it's kind of dire and extreme. When I first started working there, and even now, although to a lesser degree, just me physically being in the building gave me a certain amount of anxiety, sort of a heightened awareness. So you tend not to daydream while you're there. You tend to be paying attention to what's going on. And certainly when you're talking to an inmate, you want to be, attending to what they have to say. And I guess what I've noticed is, at first, I had some good conversations, but it was, I guess a few things happened. One thing I noticed, and I guess I should say I've had some experience working in human resources where I would speak one-on-one with people who had concerns about one thing or another. That's maybe my broad frame of reference that I would come to this job with, which of course is quite different talking to an employee who's upset about, someone leaving their lunch in the lunchroom too long or whatever, versus, an inmate who's, talking about, more severe matters, I suppose. But that is sort of the frame I had going in. And it struck me that, I guess there's a lot going on. You want to listen to what the inmate's saying and also kind of pay attention to oneself, but not too much. You want to because you're trying to take notes on how, mental notes on how the interaction is going. You want to listen to what they're saying, and you kind of want to get sort of behind what they're saying, or understand the feelings that are coming from the words that they're sharing. And I noticed there was a pattern, especially early on, that many inmates wanted to, how do I put this, explain to me, actually it's more than explain, it's like they were trying to win me over to some specific view, that they've been treated badly by the system, that they should have more privileges. And again, the tone was, and again, I won't speak about specifics, but that they, I think, were trying to figure out if, advocating to me could, improve their situation. And by that I mean their physical, not their spiritual situation, but their actual, physical, material situation. Can I get them out of segregation? Can I convince a CO to allow them to have an item that maybe they otherwise wouldn't be allowed in their cell, that kind of thing. And I felt that, and I didn't know what to do with it because I didn't want to sort of argue with them. Yet at the same time, as a chaplain in a jail, you have basically zero power. You can't go and change things around for people really. Certainly not in my role as a student doing a work placement. But I think even as a full-time chaplain, your ability to change their situation is quite limited. And I noticed that after a while, and I should say that I'm meeting with different people. The nature of this institution is that most, although not all, most of the inmates I'm talking to are what they call remanded inmates, meaning they haven't gone to trial for whatever charges they're in for. So they haven't officially been found guilty. They're awaiting a trial, so they're in that process, and they haven't been granted bail, so they need to be remanded. So that's mostly the people I'm talking to, so their trials are still to be determined. Now, having said that, many of them, and they would volunteer this, even though they haven't been found guilty yet for the charges that they're there for now, perhaps earlier in their life they had been in the system, had been found guilty, had done time either at a provincial facility or a federal one in some cases. So, but the charges that are current, for the most part, they have not been sentenced. So that's, again, I felt that there was a lot of people sort of advocating or wanted me to advocate for them or get them things, that kind of thing. And I'm not sure if my disposition changed or what, but because it's not even the same people that I'm seeing each time, although often they are some of the same people that I see week in and week out. But I suspect something maybe has changed with how I've presented myself, where generally speaking, maybe I've got sort of better answers, or I can, I give them the sense that I'm unable to get these things, so that the advocacy doesn't seem to be there as much as it did in the beginning. Also too, like trying to win me over to a specific narrative. And I think what I tell them, or what I try to communicate, is I'm not really interested in being convinced about, certain facts about their case. Like I'm not the judge, I'm not the lawyer. So winning me over doesn't really change anything. That I'm there, that I'm more interested in their spiritual well-being and how they're coping and that kind of thing. So I find that the longer I do this, the more easily and more naturally the conversation goes to more spiritual issues. And that's surprised me. A lot of people want to talk about spiritual issues, religious issues. And I mean, I've got some ideas as to why that might be the case. I think certainly, being in a room by yourself for most of the day without a phone, without TV, without the internet, maybe with some reading material, like it gives you a long time to do some thinking about your situation and what's going on in your life and how you might want to improve that. I've noticed that the longer I've done this, not only the more easily again, this is sort of a percentage thing. There are people who just say, like, no, thank you, I'm not interested in talking to you. And if that's the case, I just move along. But as a percentage, more people seem to be interested in talking to me. Now, again, could it be for other reasons, like just boredom? Like, here's someone who's willing to chat? Yeah, there's probably some of that as well. But the engagements seem to be getting sort of deeper on spiritual issues, and the conversations are getting longer as well. The first couple of weeks I was there, what felt like a fairly long and reasonably intense conversation might literally be like, 5, 7, 8 minutes kind of thing. And now more frequently, like if I find I have to often stop the conversation just so I can see other inmates, because they're, in some cases, not every case, but are going to, 20 minutes, 25 minutes where we're talking about fairly deep spiritual issues. And it's quite a privilege to witness some of these stories and to hear some of these stories. It's spiritually intense, I guess, is one way to put it. I believe that what goes on inside a jail, I guess in terms of inside the heart of a man, is largely the same stuff that happens on the outside, only it's intensified. I think we all struggle with these things, these ideas of, what we want to do with our life, feelings of guilt, feelings of aspirations, feelings of hurt, people who have let us down, people that we've let down, things not working out the way we had hoped or intended, the general messiness and brokenness of life. Like, all those things I think exist on the outside, but they are just intensified and amplified on the inside. So you kind of get to these spiritual topics fairly quickly, it seems to me, and not in a forced way. I was kind of surprised at how, if you just ask someone like how they're coping or how they're managing, and listen carefully, and then ask another question, and then ask another one, that very quickly you can get to some pretty deep conversations about what's going on in their lives. And there's some horrific stories out there. And I say some of the stuff, I think I mentioned this in my other video, or if I didn't, I'll say it now. It's my intention with these videos to talk about like what is, like the state of working in a jail, not to delve into what should be or how things should be changed, or whether it's just or unjust or that kind of thing. I mean, I have some feelings about that kind of thing, but I think from a standpoint of doing ministry inside a jail, those things are largely secondary in nature. Again, the major themes are, you see the brokenness of humanity, you see themes like guilt and forgiveness and trying to do a bit better each day. And you see hope break through. There's this image in Genesis, I don't know the chapter off the top of my head, I want to say 28, but I might be way off. Anyway, it's the story where Jacob sees a ladder. So I can't remember if this is before or after he wrestles with God, but it's around that time. Oh, I got a helicopter coming in here. Yeah, there's this story in Genesis where Jacob has a dream and he sees angels ascending and descending either a ladder or a staircase, depending on the translation. And I think even the original Hebrew has connotations of either. And I guess the idea is these angels are messengers, and they're moving in both directions, which I think is important, that somehow things from the earthly realm are getting to the heavenly realm, and God is hearing what his creation is saying to him. And similarly, God is communicating to his creation, to people in the creation. And I'm not sure, maybe I'm going past the text here, but I sort of think of like the highest of the high to the lowest of the low, that God is willing to send his messengers to descend to the lowest places. And it sometimes feels like God has afforded me the opportunity to participate in this, or to witness this, where even in a jail, which is among one of the lower places you can be, a more desperate place, that somehow God still wants to communicate with people in these dire situations. And I'm not saying like a chaplain's the only way that God can do that. Of course, there's many ways. But it seems to me that somehow there's something, from heaven going down into a dark place to meet with people, and I guess invite them into something. And in terms of like going up and going down, and this is sort of a scary thought, but setting aside what you think about a literal hell after this life, whether that exists, or if it does, how it exists, I'm going to put all that aside. But from what I've seen in jail, is it certainly seems to me that some kind of hell for some people can exist here. And that's scary. I've seen men who, for lack of a better word, are in their own hell. And it's a sight to behold. And the thing about hell is it seems like there's always a deeper version of it. And I guess the corollary of that is that no matter what kind of hell you're in, things can always be a bit better. And it seems to me that one's decisions, I want to say tone of heart, but how you choose to deal with your lot in that moment. Although you can't change everything, you can never change everything, it seems to me you can always change something. And that change can make things, a little bit better or maybe a lot worse. Making things worse is much easier and much faster. Making things better takes more work, and maybe that's why we assign up, because it takes energy. Like there's this gravity that we have to move against. But there is hope. I've seen men in there who are, for lack of a better word, in their own hell, and I've seen them, I guess, climb out of that to some degree. Again, not get totally better instantly, but change in such a way where they are in a better place than, an earlier time I saw them. One thing I'm finding too is seeing some of the same inmates, and even some of the other ones that I've seen for the first time. I'm not sure if this is a skill exactly or perception, but I'm amazed at how I can look at someone and almost instantly get an idea if they're doing better or worse than when I saw them the week before. Like even before they speak a word, there's something about their, I'm not sure it's their body language, their facial expression. I'm not one to really think about auras and things like that, but it's kind of something like that, like a light in their eyes. And it's amazing. You can see some people who, 1 week are in a pretty bad place, and then you see them like the next week, and it's like, even before they open their mouth, you can see like they're doing better. Like something has brightened in their lives. I mean, they're still in jail. They're still wearing the orange jumpsuit. They're still in a cell, but something in them has changed, even to make things a little bit better. So these are sort of small miracles that I've witnessed. Anyway, I'll leave it there. I might have more to say about what I've seen and the work that I've done and sort of how I approach it. But I think for this video, that's enough, and I'll leave it there. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I have more to say about how working on the inside of a jail has changed me emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, or in other ways. Anyway, until then, thanks for watching.